So thank you very much for allowing me to spend a few minutes with you today. How many of you were listened to the IBM keynote this morning with Mark Ayer? A few of you. He made a very broad stroke discussion about the things that we're doing at IBM around helping you in general on security. He made a couple of references at the very end of things that were particularly important, and one of those is securing the cloud. So what, in some respects, I'm going to take that from there and spend a few minutes talking about this topic. Now, I'll mention a couple slides at the end of some things that we have to offer, but I think the thing that I want to really spend my time on is maybe give you some thoughts, some insights of some of our experiences that we've been having with customers all over the world as they sort of think about this and think about what security means to their cloud deployments and how it's the same and or different than than the rest of their environment. So I guess for a show of hands, and I'm gonna hope that more of you raise your hand than not, how many of you have workloads in cloud-based environments in some form, moving them there or have them there? Okay? I guess for those of you who didn't raise your hand, I'll ask why, but I'll assume that if you don't have workloads in the cloud, that you're thinking about it. Obviously, moving workloads to the cloud means a variety of different things, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. I guess I'll probably submit that even if you don't think you have workloads in the cloud, you probably do. If you're taking advantage of commercial cloud services like Box and Dropbox and Office 365 and Salesforce and things like that, you're getting business value out of commercial cloud-based environments. And if you are, then there are some security implications around that. So I'm going to, again, in a broad stroke, kind of talk about that. A few of the things I think that are some initial, hopefully some insights for you. We're seeing our customers all over the world rapidly moving their workloads to the cloud somehow. Not only just new workloads, but moving their existing workloads. We've got a big bank in the UK that is committed to moving 95% of their workloads to the cloud in the next few years. They see the overall business value, reducing the cost of doing business, the flexibility, the nimbleness. So our experience is it's happening all over, and so therefore you better be ready for it, even if you think you're not doing it. When I say multi-cloud, what I'm saying is I will assume that you are not relying on a single cloud service provider if you have workloads in the cloud, whether that be Amazon Web Services or Azure or IBM Cloud or Google or whatever it might be. This is a very important concept because each one of the cloud service providers, including IBM, we know that our customers need good security of their data. I think on a general basis, customers will start out with sort of a natural distrust if they're moving their critical data onto some platform that they don't own completely. I could kind of make the case that it may be more trustworthy because our reputations are built on keeping it secure. But nevertheless, all of the cloud service providers are doing a really nice job of providing a base level of security for the workloads that are on their environments. But I see very few customers that have just standardized on one single cloud service provider. And so because of that, you can't rely on your cloud service provider for your security. It can help, for sure. It can be part of the overall program, but you better be thinking holistically beyond just a given cloud service provider in terms of what the security implications are. And I'll talk a lot about what all that means in a moment. So I'm going to talk about the concept of shared responsibility. Again, I think that's really important. Rely on your cloud service provider to provide a base level of security, and then you have to do more on top of that. You probably heard today, and maybe you have experience that on a general basis, finding good talent for security is a challenge. Our experience with our customers is finding good talent for securing their cloud environments is even more of a challenge. So that's something you got to keep in mind, and we can help on that. I'll talk about that. While there's a ton of really good reasons to move your workloads to the cloud, and if you've done that, you probably understand that, being able to be more nimble, being able to stand up workloads really quickly, the overall cost of business, the getting out of the infrastructure business on your own. But on a general basis, our customers are telling us that security is not necessarily one of the reasons why they're moving to cloud in the first place, and oftentimes that's a barrier. As I mentioned a moment ago, I think that the cloud service providers are doing a really good job, but at the end of the day, I think all of us, either rightly or wrongly, have this general sense, if I'm going to take all of my personnel data or all of my intellectual property or any subset of it and put it out on some infrastructure that I don't have complete control over, then I'm probably going to be a little concerned about that. And I think rightfully so. And we can talk about encryption. Okay, so we encrypt the data in a cloud service provider, in a cloud environment. But where's the key? Who owns the key? Where's a copy of the key? Where's a backup of the copy? Where's a copy of the backup of the key? How do you really know if your data encrypted is truly secure if you don't really know where the key is and you don't own that key? So that's maybe kind of an example of the kind of thing. What I want to talk about, I think, is maybe give you some insights of what the overall things you need to be thinking about and some ways that you can have, reduce security as being a barrier for your cloud deployments, because the value is there otherwise, I think. We're finding that the regulators, whoever they are worldwide, oftentimes come with a unique and specific set of regulations and compliance requirements associated with cloud environments. So they're very concerned about where the data is and what's the legal jurisprudence of that data, thinking about issues of identity and access, who can access that data. Maybe you've done the best job in the world in encryption, but if you don't have good practices for how you're offering access to that data, then encryption doesn't do any good if a privileged user's identity has been violated in some form. Those kinds of things. Encryption management, we talked about that. Security incidents, Mark talked about that in his keynote. But again, we're seeing that the regulators are paying particularly close attention to this for all the things that we just talked about. Well, I mean, we certainly have standard, and I have to pause a little bit. I'm a security guy, but I'm not an IBM Cloud guy, so I'm ever so slightly secondhand. But on a general basis, as we offer our services, and for where customers can put their workloads in our environments, we certainly provide legal language that provides some level of assurance, and we'll tell you exactly what we're doing. And then as a customer, you decide whether that's good enough. But we'll commit to whatever we said we're going to do. If we're going to encrypt it, we'll encrypt it for you. If we're going to put key management in place, we'll put key management for you. I don't think any business is necessarily provider's going to consider themselves to be fully liable for any breach, but we'll certainly participate that somehow or another. But it's all in the legal language, and that's stuff that I can't. I know I'm probably not giving you a very good answer. Maybe we can follow up afterwards. Because again, that's not an area that I'm as versed in. So, if you want to know more, we can talk.
I just wanted to mention, if it's possible, please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. Then we can answer all of them.
Yeah. Okay. So we've been talking today about security in general. The larger the organization is, the more sort of holistically you need to think about security, and all this is really important. But when you bring in more places for your workloads to reside, then security just inherently gets more complicated. We'll talk a lot. I'm sure you've heard the terms of attack surfaces. The more places you have workloads, the more sort of connections you have between those hosts. the more of a challenge that it can be to put security practices in place that absolutely protect your data as best as you can. So, and then you add that to the fact that, one of the things that the cloud service providers do really well is allow you to stand up new workloads. They give you great DevOps tools for building new workloads with all kinds of tiles and components that you can easily put together. It's amazing how quickly workloads can be put together, but oftentimes security becomes a little bit of an afterthought around that, so it creates a potential exposure for you. I talked about multi-cloud. I'll talk about hybrid cloud, and hybrid cloud is for theoretically, hopefully close to 100% of customers who haven't moved every single workload off-prem. A hybrid cloud environment is some combination of the computers that you still own, maybe less of them, and the various cloud service providers that you're working with. All of these factors, all of these hosts for your workload, again, create some complications that you need to think about from a security standpoint. It's all doable, it's just a little bit harder because you've got more attack surfaces. If you think about the cloud service provider themselves, and I'll talk about what I'll call security in the cloud, the kind of things that IBM Cloud and Amazon Web Services will provide you native platform services. That might include encryption, for example, along with the tools for continuous development at the line of business. So this can provide a level of continuous security and protection of the data. However, as I said, I don't think that's enough. And I think that if you really want to do security right, these are what we'll call our 6 imperatives, starting with identity and access management, data protection, visibility, application, network, and workload management. And these are all disciplines of security that I think are important that you need to think about as you think about deploying your workloads. And these are things that more often than not really go beyond just a given service provider. One of the things, as an employee of IBM, I appreciate the fact that we've done a pretty good job of I have one intranet login ID and password that I can use for accessing all kinds of my services that I use day to day, including a lot of cloud-based services. So a single sign-on kind of approach that allows your end users, whoever they might be, to not have to keep track of different login IDs and passwords and all the challenges that can happen when you don't do that well. That's identity and access management. Obviously data protection, encrypting data, monitoring databases, thinking about where your critical data is and how best to protect them. Visibility and intelligence, I think, becomes particularly important. I think we all sort of understand what security intelligence is. When you add more places for the workloads to reside and more attack surfaces, then visibility across the enterprise becomes even more important, and then down the line. But these are the kinds of things that I think your CISO is hopefully thinking about, is how do I think about all the different workloads, all the different cloud environments where my workloads live. How can I understand those? How can I secure those properly? So this is an important concept, I think. Kind of another way to look at it, again, starting with the services that your cloud service provider will provide, and they're going to provide a basic set of identity services, and they're going to provide a basic set of storage and data encryption services, key management, et cetera. But again, it's tied to their environment, what they can control and own. And what you need to do is add to that with identity and access management that crosses your entire enterprise. Monitoring your critical data wherever it lives, cloud or otherwise. Scanning applications for security wherever those applications might be hosted. Those kinds of things. Thinking about encryption from a multi-cloud basis, not just necessarily from one cloud environment. So if there's one thing I'd like for you to walk out of this session is the notion that securing your workloads in cloud environments is inherently a shared responsibility. Rely on your cloud service provider where it makes sense, and then add to it in those areas that make sense. You cannot do just one or the other. It's got to be both. That's maybe my go-to message walking out of here. When we think about all of this, I think there's sort of three basic use cases that we think about. First off, taking existing workloads that you have in your own infrastructure, Wintel, Linux, Unix, whatever it might be, and migrating that to the cloud. And you're not building anything new, you're just putting it in a new place somehow or another, and then starting to think about what the connections are along the way. Building cloud native applications, I talked about that. That's kind of building from scratch, having developers go to the great DevOps tools that Amazon Web Services provide and start to spin up workloads. Again, if you're not careful, it's so cool, it's so fast, you can get workloads out there real quickly, and the guy didn't think very hard about security. And then finally, taking your existing workloads in an on-prem environment, maybe you trust that from an availability or a scalability standpoint, but you want to extend it to put front ends in place that are hosted in cloud environments. So this is particularly a hybrid kind of approach. And there you might have data passing back and forth between your on-premises databases and databases hosted in a cloud service provider, which then introduces a new set of challenges for monitoring and protecting that data. So as we think about these two broad stroke workloads, and one that's not here is what I'll call shadow IT, when you've contracted with Office 365 or Dropbox or Box or any of those kinds of off-prem tools. It's a commercial environment. There's certainly a unique set of identity and access requirements. I'm not going to really talk about that too much here. In thinking about migrating existing workloads to the cloud, I could spend a lot of time here, but I just want to sort of broadly say that I think the first thing that you need to do is assess what the security profile is. You know, where is your critical data? How do you want to protect it? How important is it? What kind of comes from your cloud service provider? So various kinds of assessments to understand that. Again, we can help. Once you understand what your risks might be, put the policies and procedures and programs and software and tools and practices in place to harden that security. Access management is a key aspect of that, along with data protection. And then finally, from a continuous basis, you want to watch it. You want to be able to monitor it and understand what your risks are. Mark talked this morning about sort of the standard statistics that say that it takes 266 days for customers to figure out that they've got a breach. You want to reduce that. You want to monitor that. You want to put tools in place that are monitoring all the activity. And it's particularly important when it's in environments that you control a little bit less of. So here's an example. We have built a connection with Amazon Web Services and QRadar to understand misconfigurations within there. And so we've got a dashboard and a QRadar that'll identify these misconfigurations and give you guidance on how to resolve it. Building cloud native applications, you don't necessarily have to assess anything because they're not there, but you need to think about how your developers are spinning up these new workloads and making sure that they're putting key security modules in place, particularly the right kind of access management. You want to think about, as you bring these new workloads in, how you integrate them with your more broader security aspects. Enterprise single sign-on, again, incorporating that so that your end users don't have to think about another set of login IDs and passwords that can be potentially violated. Thinking about data protection from an enterprise standpoint, and again, having a practice, a policy that covers all your data wherever it might be, not different based upon its underlying platform. And again, we talked about continuous compliance. That's always important. The bad actors are going to find ways to get past your systems. They just will. They're very resourceful. But the better you can do to monitor that, the more that you can prevent damage from happening. For example, we've got a capability to build enterprise identity into a new cloud-based application. So we've got a cloud-based identity tools to bring that single sign-on into the new application really quickly by just adding a module to it at build time. Finally, as you think about extending existing workloads to the cloud, data protection is a key aspect. You want to think about data discovery across that enterprise. You want to think about encryption and key management across the enterprise. You'll want to own that key if you want to really know you protected the data. Access management issues, privileged identities are important. Your high value or your end users with high value access. How are you really monitoring that in a special way? How are you governing identity? Identity governance is always a big deal. You bring somebody in, you give them some access, they move on to a new job, they get new access, you move them on to a new job, they get new access, and they may or may not have that existing the access they need taken away, and you end up with over-entitlement, you end up with all kinds of issues. You end up with separation of duties issues where, the classic example, somebody has the ability to open up a purchase order and submit it, and that same person can approve their own purchase order. That's sort of the classic SOD issue, and that can happen in a cloud environment just as well. And again, of course, monitoring and compliance of that. So, for example, we've got native key management in IBM Cloud, and we've got multi-cloud encryption for going across environments. I'm not going to go through all of these, but everything that I've talked about up till now, IBM has some solutions that can help out on that. So I put these in as small of a font as possible to make sure I didn't spend any time on them. But these are all aspects that we can help out on to provide you that enterprise level protection. Anybody in the room from financial organizations? Okay. As I mentioned up front, we're seeing that the regulators, particularly financial institutions, are particularly concerned about cloud environments and moving workloads to that. So we offer a service for financial institutions to help them understand their compliance requirements from a cloud environment and give them the right recommendations about what they need to do in the context of GDPR, in the context of whatever the regulation is. So we've got a lot of expertise from a financial regulatory compliance standpoint that we can help you out on. We have a whole set of assessment services that we can offer. Again, I talked about how assessment is an important part of thinking about securing your workloads. So there's a lot that we can do to help out in terms of coming in and assessing the environment, analyzing where your gaps may be, and give you recommendations about what you need to do about it. And that doesn't necessarily buying more IBM products, but it can be helpful because we've got a lot of expertise on that. Our services environment we recently got a designation from Amazon Web Services as part of their Guard Duty facilities to provide QRadar, security intelligence, incident response for resilient, intelligent security monitoring, and then managed security services. So we help a lot of customers with just everything they need to do from a security standpoint in their cloud workloads. So if you recognize the need, but you don't have your own resources for it, there's a lot we can do to help out from that standpoint. Mark more or less showed this slide in his session this morning, but I think we're uniquely in a position to be both a really market-leading security organization that covers the whole gamut of the kind of things you need to effectively secure your environment, but also, because IBM is who we are, we also have a strong cloud service provider environment, and we can kind of use those experiences to help you out. We've got leading solutions in access management, in security intelligence and visibility, database monitoring, et cetera. Mark bragged about the professionals we have really worldwide. We've been chosen by Amazon Web Services to provide global security services for their environments. So there's really a lot that we have to offer from that standpoint. So with that in mind, I got a few minutes left for any other questions that might have come up along the way. Covered a lot of ground in a few minutes, but didn't go late.